A scandal in Bohemia. For Sherlock Holmes, she was always a woman. I rarely heard him refer to her by any other name. In his eyes, she overshadows and dominates all women. He harbored no love-like feelings toward Irene Adler. All emotions, especially this one, were repulsive to his cold, precise, but admirably balanced mind. I suppose he was the most perfect, reasoning and observational machine the world had ever seen, but as a lover, he would have placed himself in the wrong position. He never spoke of softer passions with a cynical and contemptuous tone. These were admirable things for the observer, perfect for revealing people's motivations and actions. But for an educated reasoner to allow such interference in his own delicate and finely tuned temperament meant introducing a distracting factor that could cast doubt on all his mental conclusions. A grain of sand in a delicate instrument, or a crack in one of his own high-powered lenses, would not be more disturbing than a powerful emotion in a nature like his. Yet for him there was only one woman, and that woman was the late Irene Adler, whose memory is dubious and controversial. I hadn't seen Holmes much lately. Our marriage had distanced us, while my own happiness and my home-centered interests, centered around a man who was the master of his own institution, were enough to occupy all my attention. Holmes, with all his bohemian spirit and aversion to all social life, remained buried among his old books in our Baker Street room, oscillating week after week between cocaine and ambition, the numbness of drugs and the violent energy of his own sharp nature. As always, he was deeply interested in crime investigation, and devoted his immense talents and extraordinary powers of observation to following leads and unraveling mysteries that had been hopelessly abandoned by the official police. From time to time I heard vague information about his activities, his summoning to Odessa in the case of the Trepoff murder, the unraveling of the bizarre tragedy of the Atkinson brothers in Trincomalee, and finally the task he carried out with utmost subtlety and success for the Holland family in power. However, beyond these signs of activity that I shared with all readers of the daily press, I knew very little about my old friend and comrade. One night, it was March 20th, 1888, after visiting a patient, for I had now returned to civilian practice, I was passing Baker Street. Passing the door I remembered well, the one I always associated with my love story and the dark events of the Red Study. I felt a strong desire to see Holmes again and learn how he used his extraordinary powers. The rooms were brightly lit, and when I looked up I saw his tall, thin figure pass twice behind the curtain as a dark silhouette. He paced quickly and eagerly around the room, his head resting on his chest, his hands clasped behind his back. As someone who knew him in all his ways, his manner and behavior told its own story. He was back at work. He had awakened from the dreams induced by drugs and was now pursuing a new problem. I rang the bell and was led to the room that had previously been partly mine. His demeanor was not overly enthusiastic. It rarely happened, but I think he was pleased to see me. Almost without speaking, but with a gentle glance, he invited me to an armchair, tossed me his cigar case, and pointed to the bottle of liquor and soda in the corner. Then he stood before the fireplace and surveyed me with his characteristic introverted gaze. "Marriage suits you," he remarked. "I suppose, Watson, you've gained 7.5 pounds since I last saw you." "7," I replied. I should have thought about it a little more, actually. "Just a little more, Watson. And again, practically, I notice. You didn't tell me you were considering joining the harness." "So how do you know that?" "I see, I deduce. How do I know you've been so wet lately and that you have such an utterly clumsy and careless maid?" "My dear Holmes," I said, "this is too much. If you had lived a few centuries ago, you would certainly have been burned at the stake. It's true, I went for a walk in the countryside on Thursday and came home in a terrible state. But I don't understand how you figured that out, since I changed my clothes. As for Mary Jane, she's incorrigible, and my wife has submitted her resignation, but still, I don't understand how you figured that out." He chuckled to himself and rubbed his long, tense hands together. "It's extremely simple," he said. "My eyes tell me that on the inside of your left shoe, where the firelight strikes, the leather is marked with 6 almost parallel cuts. Clearly, these were made by someone who was trying to clean dried mud by very carelessly scraping the edges of the sole. Therefore, I deduced that you were outside in bad weather and that you possess a particularly ill-intentioned example of a London slave cutting a shoe. As for your profession, if a gentleman enters my chambers smelling of iodoform, with a stain of silver nitrate on his right index finger, and a bulge on the right side of his top hat showing where he keeps his stethoscope. I would be truly foolish if I did not declare him an active member of the medical profession. I couldn't help but laugh at how easily he explained his method of reasoning. When I hear you explain your reasoning, I said, it all seems so ridiculously simple to me that I could easily do it myself. But with each of your examples of reasoning, I'm baffled until you explain the process. Yet I believe my eyes are as good as yours. That's right, he replied, lighting a cigarette and settling into an armchair. You see, but you don't observe. The difference is clear. For example, you've seen the steps leading from the living room to this room often. Often. How often? Yes, hundreds of times. And how many? How many? I don't know. Absolutely. You didn't observe, but you saw. That's exactly what I mean. Now, I know there are 17 steps because I both saw and observed. By the way, since you're interested in these little problems and deem it worthy to record a couple of my insignificant experiences, this might interest you too. He tossed a thick, pinkish notepaper that lay open on the table. It arrived with the last mail, he said. Read it aloud. The note had no date, no signature, and no address. A gentleman will be visiting you tonight at 8:15. Wishing to speak with you about a matter of great importance, it read. Your recent services to a European royal family have shown that you can be trusted with matters of undeniable importance. We have received this information about you from various sources. Be in your room at that hour and do not object to your visitor wearing a mask. This is truly a mystery, I said. What do you think it might mean? I don't have any data yet. To formulate theories without data is a grave mistake. One unconsciously begins to fit facts to theories, rather than fitting facts to theories. But the note itself, what do you deduce from it? I carefully examined the writing and the paper on which it was written. I suspect the man who wrote this was probably wealthy, I remarked, trying to imitate my friend's method. You can't get paper like this for less than half a shilling a pack, especially sturdy and hard. Strange. That's exactly the word it should be, said Holmes. It's not at all an English newspaper. Hold it up to the light. I did, and saw a large E and a small G, a P, and a large G and a small T embedded in the paper's texture. What do you think of that? Asked Holmes. Certainly the manufacturer's name, or rather his monogram. Not at all. The G, spelled with a lowercase t, is an abbreviation for Gesellschaft, which means company in German. It's a common abbreviation like our Co. And the P, of course, stands for Papier. Now let's get to egg. Let's take a look at our continental geography dictionary. He picked up a heavy, brown book from the shelves. Iglo, Eglonitz, here we are. Egria, in a German-speaking country, Bohemia, not far from Carlsbad, the place where Wallenstein died. And it's notable for its countless glass and paper mills. Ha, ha, son, what do you get from that? His eyes lit up, and he took a large, triumphant cloud of blue smoke from his cigarette. This paper was made in Bohemia, I said. Absolutely. And the person who wrote the note is German. Note the strange structure of the sentence. We have received information about you from everywhere. A Frenchman or a Russian could not have written this, a German so crude in his actions. Therefore, it remains to be discovered what this German, who writes on Bohemian paper and prefers to wear a mask rather than show his face, wants. And if I am not mistaken, he is coming to dispel all our suspicions. As they spoke, the sharp sound of horses, hooves, and the rubbing of wheels on the pavement were heard, followed by a sharp knock on the bell. Holmes whistled. From the sound I understand a couple, he said. Yes, he continued, looking out the window. A pretty little carriage and two pretty ladies. 150 guineas each. There is money in that case, Watson, even if nothing else. I think I'd better go, Holmes. Not at all, Doctor. Stay where you are. I feel lost without my Boswell, and this looks very interesting. It would be a pity to miss it. But your client? Leave him alone. I may need your help, and so may he. Here he comes. Doctor, please sit in that chair and give us your best attention. A slow, heavy footstep echoed down the stairs and corridor, stopping just outside the door. Then came a loud, authoritative click. Come in, said Holmes. A man entered, at least 1.98 meters tall, with a chest and limbs like Hercules. His clothes were so rich and ostentatious that they would be considered bad taste in England. Thick astrakhan ribbons were sewn onto the sleeves and front of his double-buttoned jacket, and the dark blue cape he draped over his shoulders, was lined with flame-colored silk and fastened at his neck with a brooch of a single flame-colored beryl. His boots, reaching halfway up his calves and trimmed at the tops with rich brown fur, completed the impression of barbaric wealth that his whole appearance evoked. He carried a wide-brimmed hat and wore a black visard mask that covered the upper part of his face, extending down to his cheekbones. His hand was still reaching for the mask as he entered, suggesting he had adjusted it at that moment. From the lower part of his face, his thick, drooping lip and long, straight chin, reflecting a stubborn determination, revealed him to be a man of strong character. "Did you get my note? I told you I would call," he asked in a deep, stern voice with a distinct German accent. He looked from one of us to the other, as if unsure of whom to address. "Please sit down," said Holmes. "This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. He is so kind as to assist me in my cases from time to time. To whom do I have the honor of addressing you?" "You may address me as Count von Kram, a Bohemian nobleman. As I understand it, this gentleman, your friend, is a man of honor and common sense whom I can confide in on a matter of utmost importance. Otherwise, I would prefer to speak with you alone." I wanted to get up and leave, but Holmes took my wrist and pushed me back into my chair. "Either both or neither," he said. "You can say whatever you want to say to me in the presence of this gentleman." The Count shrugged his broad shoulders. "Then," he said, "I must bind you both to an oath of absolute secrecy for 2 years. At the end of that time, the matter will be of no importance. It would not be an exaggeration to say that at this moment it is important enough to affect the course of European history." "I promise," said Holmes. "And please excuse this disguise," continued our strange visitor. "The esteemed person who hired me wishes his representative not to be recognized by you, and I must confess immediately that the title I just used is not precisely mine." "I was aware of that," said Holmes in a dry tone. "The situation is extremely delicate, and every precaution must be taken to prevent a situation that could escalate into a major scandal and seriously endanger one of Europe's leading families. To put it plainly, this matter concerns the great house of Ormstein, the hereditary kings of Bohemia." "I knew that too," Holmes murmured, settling comfortably into his armchair and closing his eyes. Our visitor looked with astonishment at the sluggish, relaxed posture of the man who had been introduced to him as Europe's sharpest intellect and most energetic agent. Holmes slowly opened his eyes again and looked impatiently at his enormous client. "If His Majesty would deign to explain your case," he stated, "I can offer you better advice." The man leaped from his chair and paced uncontrollably up and down the room. Then, in a desperate movement, he tore off the mask from his face and threw it to the floor. "You are right," he cried. "I am the king. Why should I try to conceal it?" "Why really?" murmured Holmes. Before His Majesty spoke, I realized I was addressing Wilhelm Gottsreich Sigismund von Ormstein, Grand Duke of Cassel-Felstein and heir to the throne of Bohemia. "But you can understand," said our strange visitor, sitting down again and nudging his high white forehead with his hand, "that I am not accustomed to doing such things on my own. However, the matter was so delicate that I could not entrust it to an intermediary without leaving myself at its mercy. I have secretly come from Prague to see you." "Then please consult," said Holmes, closing his eyes once more. "The summary of events is as follows. About 5 years ago, during a long visit to Warsaw, I met the renowned adventurer Irene Adler. Her name will sound familiar to you. Please look for her in my index." "Doctor," murmured Holmes without opening his eyes. For many years he had adopted the system of recording all paragraphs about people and things. Therefore, it was difficult to find a subject or person about whom he could not immediately provide information. In this case, I found her biography tucked away among the biographies of a Hebrew rabbi and a staff officer who had written a monograph on deep-sea fish. Let me see. Born in New Jersey in 1858. A contralto. La Scala. Principal soloist at the Imperial Opera in Warsaw. Yes. Retired from the opera stage. Lives in London, that's right. As I understand it, Her Majesty has had an affair with this young person, written her some indecent letters, and now wants them back. Absolutely. But how? Was there a secret marriage? None. No legal documents or certificates? None. Then I don't understand what Her Majesty is saying. If this young person intends to use her letters for blackmail or other purposes, how will she prove their authenticity? Here's the writing. Bah! Ah, forgery. My personal notepad. Stolen. My own seal. A counterfeit. My photograph. Purchased. We were both in the photograph. Oh dear, this is terrible. His Majesty has truly made a blunder. I was furious. I lost my mind. You put yourself in serious danger. Back then I was just the crown prince. I was young. Now I'm 30. It needs to be recovered. We tried and failed. His Majesty has to pay. It needs to be bought. He won't sell. Then it's stolen. 5 attempts have been made. Twice my hired thieves ransacked his house. Once we diverted his luggage while he was traveling. Twice he was ambushed. Nothing came of it. No trace of him found? Absolutely none. Holmes laughed. A rather pleasant little problem, he said. But this is a very serious matter for me, the king replied reproachfully. Yes, indeed it is. And what does he plan to do with the photograph? To ruin me. How? I am soon to marry. I have heard. To Clotilde Lotman von Saxe-Meiningen, the second daughter of the King of Scandinavia. You know the strict principles of her family. She herself is the epitome of grace. The slightest suspicion of my conduct would bring the matter to an end. And what about Irene Adler? He's threatening to send them the photograph. And he will. I know he will. You don't know him, but he has a soul of steel. He has the face of the most beautiful woman and the mind of the most determined man. He would rather do anything for her than for me to marry another woman. Are you sure he hasn't sent it yet? I'm sure. Why? Because he said he would send it on the day the engagement announcement is made public. That's next Monday. So we still have 3 days, said Holmes, yawning. That's very good. Because I have a couple of important matters to attend to at the moment. Her Majesty will, of course, remain in London for the time being, won't he? Certainly. You can find me at the Langham Hotel under the name Count von Kram. Then I will send you a message to keep you informed of developments. Please do. I will be very worried. And as for the money? You have full authority. Absolutely. I tell you, I would give one of my kingdom's provinces to obtain that photograph. And what about the current expenses? The king pulled a heavy suede leather bag from under his cloak and placed it on the table. There are 300 pounds of gold and 700 pounds of banknotes, he said. Holmes wrote a receipt on a page of his notebook and handed it to him. And the lady's address? He asked. Bryony Lodge, Serpentine Avenue, St. John's Wood. Holmes made a note of it. I have one more question, he said. Was the photograph a cupboard? It was. Then, good evening, Your Majesty. I hope we will have good news for you soon. And good evening, Watson, he added, as the wheels of the royal carriage moved down the street. If you stop by at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, I would like to discuss this little matter with you.